The Survivors is brought to you by our friends at Calmerry. This podcast mentions suicide, mental illness, grief and loss, and may be triggering for some listeners. So please take care of your mental well-being by pausing or skipping any sections that feel uncomfortable to you. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 for support.
Welcome to the Survivors Podcast. I'm Gretchen Schoser, a suicide attempt survivor, a mental health advocate, and the co-host of the award-winning mental health podcast, Shit That Goes On in Our Heads. Here to talk openly about what it means to navigate life after a mental health crisis. I know how isolating those dark times can be because I've been there, and I want to break that silence by diving into real conversations about surviving mental illness and suicide attempts. Each week, we'll tackle those tough topics like suicide, grief, mental illness, and loss. Topics that aren't often talked about in the mainstream. And we'll share how we've learned to face some tough situations from our own journeys as survivors. This isn't just about the struggle, it's about resilience and connection and finding hope through our shared experiences.
And I'm Lisa Sugarman, a 3-time suicide loss survivor, a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project, a storyteller with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the founder of the Help Hub, and a mental health advocate. Each week, I'll bring my own perspective as a crisis counselor and a multiple suicide loss survivor as we dive into conversations about what it means to be a survivor of a suicide attempt, a survivor of a suicide loss, or just a human who's grieving the loss of someone we love. The Survivors is about finding the strength to keep going, whether you're deep in the thick of it or you're supporting someone else who is. We're 2 different kinds of survivors with a lifetime's worth of lived experience navigating some of the toughest issues we face as humans. No topic is off limits, and our goal is to break down the stigma around mental illness, suicide, grief, and loss. Maybe have a few laughs along the way, and remind you that you're 1000% not alone.
Hey y'all, so our origin story is kind of crazy, but it's so cool. On our podcast, Shit That Goes On in Our Heads, we were looking for new guests, and I happened to join PodMatch, and Lisa's name came up, and I read her story, and I was like, man, we need to have this girl on the podcast. Crazy thing is like, we were so booked up at the time with the podcast. We'd scheduled a pre-interview for like November, and her episode didn't come out until February 2025. But we knew instantly when we had our pre-recording that we were onto something special. And I am so eternally grateful to the world for bringing us together. It was such an instant friendship. I feel like I've known Lisa my entire life.
Yeah, and it's wild. It's absolutely wild how it went down. Like you have to remember when we were meeting, like sometimes you just jump right into a podcast episode and you don't have a pre-call, but sometimes you do. And you guys had a pre-call. So you and I were supposed to spend like 10 minutes talking, and we spent like what, 2.5 hours?
It was like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
I came out of that, and my wife was like, where were you? And I'm like, oh, I was doing a pre-interview, and I now have my soul sister. It was just such a great conversation. And I remember my friend Julie was on the pre-recording with us, and she's like, something special is going to come out of this. And since then, that happened in
that was like October,
November timeframe. And then we just started talking, and we wanted to find a way to collaborate. But at the time, I was still working a part-time job and managing, shit that goes on in our heads and trying to figure everything out. And then, as fate would have it, decided to quit my job, open my own company, and do what I really wanted to do. And so Lisa and I designed this podcast knowing that the world needs to hear our message, right? Being a suicide attempt survivor, not a lot of people talk about that. And I think these conversations need to be heard, and be heard from people that are survivors. Lisa being a 3-time suicide survivor, me being a suicide attempt survivor, we bring an interesting perspective to this talk. And I have my own lived experiences, and mental health sucks. And
Yeah,
it,
for
it
sure.
can it can totally drain you. But we hope to be able to give you some insight. And my end goal really is to normalize these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think about what you and I were like on that. Like, I wish we had recorded our first couple of phone calls because it was wild. Just two people who had never met each other to just instantly click and instantly bond. And it wasn't just because of like just a human connection, like, two people vibing. It was two people just completely getting each other's stories and what each other had been through and feeling that like to your bones. Like I think you and I, after like the second time we talked, we were like, okay, I love you. Bye. It's like, and we still say that. And it was crazy because we're bonding around suicide, and I love the fact that we're sitting here giggling, but our podcast is called The Survivors and it's about suicide, loss and grief and all these crazy, heavy, heavy things. And yet you and I are out here trying to change that. And the way that we change that is by just having the conversations, just saying the words, just, talking the talk. And it's like you and I did that so freely and so easily that it was just such a no-brainer that our natural collaboration would be a podcast. And then, of course, you being part of the wildly, wildly successful podcast shit that goes on in our heads, which is already in the mental health space, winning all sorts of crazy awards and, hitting 1 million downloads and all these crazy things. You're like, oh, hey, yeah, we should do a podcast. And I'm like, have you lost your mind? Want to do another podcast? Because, you're already doing this incredible podcast. And you were like, no, it's good. It's going to be good. This is exactly the kind of stuff I want to do. And I had been waiting for something to like a lightning bolt because Dave, my husband, who, in the weeks and months ahead, you'll hear lots about Dave and my kids. Dave has been up my ass for such a long time to try to get me to start a podcast. And I knew what I didn't want to do. Like I knew I didn't necessarily want to have like the host guest format all the time. I mean, I know you and I are going to be bringing people on here and there, but more than anything, we're going to be having these conversations. And so I just remember thinking to myself and saying to him, like, no, like I want to have the conversations I want to have. I want to be able to say what's on my mind and, kind of bounce off someone who gets it, but I don't know who that would be. And, you got to have this thing in your head that's floating around and bouncing around. And then when you and I met and we talked that first and second time, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the place. This is the person. This is the time. And this is the thing.
And I was just so giddy. I remember going and talking to my wife, and she's like, "God, are you crazy? You like already have all these other things on your plate."
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's not work. It's something I'm super passionate about, and I want people to see me as a story of hope because, on Christmas Day, 2022, I tried to take my life. Thank God for 988. I'm here today. And I'm not sad that I went through all that because I wouldn't be where I am today doing the things that I love, changing the world one conversation at a time. And when I talk with Lisa, it's just like, it's this incredible conversation, right? It's like we're soul sisters. She lives maybe 4.5 hours from me. Probably won't go and see her, until the snow melts because, you know what? I don't feel like driving. I just don't. But,
Neither does anybody else.
Yeah, because it's gross.
Right.
But, we will inject some laughter into this because, hindsight is 20/20. And you can go back and laugh at some of the shit that happened, but it makes it real. And we're super vulnerable. Like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. And I'm just trying to make the world a better place. It now more than ever, these conversations need to be had, need to be heard, and action needs to be taken. And truly, if you're feeling those suicidal thoughts where you just don't know where else to turn, please call 988. They're there. They're free. They're the most compassionate people I've ever spoken to in my entire life. And it's available here in the States and in Canada. So, utilize that. And it's funny, Lisa, that we're having this conversation because I got a Instagram voicemail message the other day from a guest that was on my podcast. And it was from a lady in Canada. And she said that her friend's daughter ended up calling 988. And they didn't realize that that number was available until they started listening to our podcast.
It's amazing.
And so
that's it. That's it right there. You've done it. You've done the thing.
We've done the thing, right? And she's the daughter, the woman's daughter was just so thankful that she had somebody to talk to. And like we're two normal everyday people, right? You and I, I've got 45 years in the corporate world, and being 61, I just quit my job and start something new. So, like, look at that, right? But I still went through that really hard stuff, and what worked for me may not work for everybody else. But being able to talk through it and be open about it, and just embracing who we are in these conversations is so utterly important.
Yeah, we have to be able to do that, and that's the whole point. Like that's the point of what you and I want to do. Like you have so much perspective as an attempt survivor. I have my own perspective as a multiple suicide loss survivor, starting when I was 9 years old, all the way through until I lost a close friend only not even 4 years ago. So plus my dad in the middle of all that, and we each bring so many unique perspectives to this conversation. Like, I don't know if there's ever been anything like this that has two different kinds of survivors that can kind of capture the essence of just what it means to survive life. Because, even though so much of what you and I are going to talk about in all the episodes ahead has to do with suicide, it's not just a conversation about suicide. That's a big part of it. But it's about loss, it's about grief, it's about surviving mental illness, it's about surviving just like life in general. Because I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care, how much is in your bank account or what kind of car you drive. Like none of that matters. Like we're talking about stuff that equalizes every single one of us. Like, depression doesn't know where you live. It's just going to hit. Anxiety doesn't care what kind of house you live in, it's going to hit, so, it's navigating all of those things and just having these conversations that have just been in the shadows. Like, I'm just so sick and tired of the word suicide being such a taboo word. And that's part of the problem. Like that right there is part of the problem. Like we can't even say the word without people, freaking out about it. And that's what you and I are trying to change.
Yeah. And it's such an important conversation, right? Like I have now seen more in like the LinkedIn space, right? That people are talking more about suicide. Like, don't be afraid to use that word. It happens, right? I mean, like, look at Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, Twitch, all these amazing humans that took their life. And it could be because they know that somebody else was in their corner or their life was just so freaking crappy that they didn't know where to turn. I mean, I know what it feels to feel that way. Like, at my age, I'm 61, but when I did my suicide attempt, I was 58. In my generation, we were taught not to talk about anything that had to do with mental health. And there wasn't a whole lot of podcasts out there that talked openly and honest like we do on shit that goes on our heads and on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I think that our conversations and just who we are, and, we're easy. And like, I don't mind talking about this, and I'm not shameful that, it happened. Like I said, I'm actually happy that it happened because I'm much happier now that I've been in 25 years. And we're shining a light on it. And shining that light could probably save somebody else's life.
Well, that's the goal, right? That's the goal. It's to kind of smash the stigma and to push this all into the mainstream where it belongs. It's like I said, the stigma is created because we're so hush hush about these topics. It's when we start just talking about them openly and honestly that people aren't going to be so impacted by, the shame that's attached to it. We'll get rid of that shame because we'll just be having everyday conversations. And the other thing that I love is that, you and I have a lot of experience as mental health advocates, both of us, doing our own unique work. I have, experience on the crisis lifelines. That's what I do every day. But the other thing that we don't have, which I love, is that we don't have anything after our names. We don't, except that I have she, her, but we have, you don't have anything. I have she, her.
I have dash jackass.
Yes.
But
right now you do.
Show up. Yeah.
Right. But the point is, like, we don't have any clinical experience. We don't have any clinical background. You and I are not therapists. We're not counselors. I mean, I'm a crisis counselor, but I'm not a licensed clinician, and neither are you. So we're coming at this from a super humanistic point of view. We're like two people who have lived through it all. I mean, like I said, I'm 56 years old, and I had my first experience with loss, which happened to be a suicide loss, when I was 9 years old. So I've been accompanied by grief and loss literally my entire life. And I know you have too. And you've also, dealt with your share of depression, and your attempt, which, thankfully for all of us, was something that, didn't come to fruition. But I think that's what's going to separate this podcast from other podcasts. It's just like two people you can relate to, and people might just pick up little bits and pieces of, of content or of tips or of our stories that relate back to them. That's all you need. If you find one little nugget that we say that resonates with you, then that's, then that's the end game.
Take a step to your mental well-being with Calmerry, trusted online therapy platform that supports you through life's challenges. Connect with licensed therapists and reap the benefits of traditional therapy enhanced with digital tools whenever you need it. Visit Calmerry.com to get started.
It is. And, like Lisa said, we're not experts, but I'm an expert in life, man. I've been through some shit, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I live life the way that I want to live it. I don't live it for anybody else. Like, I think our lived experiences mean just as much, if not more, than having those additional initials at the end of my name, right? Mm-hmm. I survived life, and I'm here, and I'm 61 years old, and I'm going to be 62. And I just think that, in this day and age, people need this. They need these real conversations and feel like you're part of the family. And yeah, we've been there. And, depression sucks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It sucks. But, I put a lot of work in to this, to myself, to see what would be at the other end. And in one of the next episodes, we're going to kind of dive into my own story, and Lisa will dive into her own story of, just what she's gone through. And like Lisa said, I hope you get just a little nugget that will help you, and it can make you, help you for the next minute, the next day, the next month, and just know that you're not alone, right? I'm so thankful when I called 988, and I had only remembered that because there was I'd read an article, mid-November 2022, of this number and how people were getting help, and, I was sinking further and further into depression, and that little tidbit helped. But here's the great thing about a podcast is our reach is so much, has such a far reach than going to a doctor or anything else. I mean, we have the potential to be listened to around the world, and we're free.
Right.
And it's like we said, we are not clinical. We don't have degrees by any means, but we've lived our lives, and we've been through this.
School of life, baby. School of life, And one of the other things I think that I'm most excited about, I know how excited you and I have been for the last couple months to get to today, which is when we're recording. For anyone listening or watching, the buildup has been, it's like that feeling I would imagine a kid who knows they're getting a pony for their birthday, the greatest thing that could ever happen. Like, that's what this has felt like. Like, the anticipation when I got up this morning was just wild. And as much as I'm like so excited to have these conversations with you and just to like, it's a weird thing to say, like, shoot the shit about suicide and about mental illness, but like, that is what we're doing, right? The other thing I'm so excited about is that at the exact same time that we're doing this and we're having these conversations and we're shining all these lights on all these things that have been in the dark for so long, like, we're building a community. Like, that's the thing. I love building community so much. And like, all of a sudden I just got this massive wave of emotion and it's like stuck in my throat right now. So I just think about what kind of power we all have together as people start to listen, as people share a podcast, as people hopefully recycle it and play these conversations over there in their heads again. I just am so excited to build a community where people can come and feel safe and feel heard and feel seen and feel supported and feel comfortable just talking about with whatever they feel like they need to talk about that helps them survive.
Yeah, because, sharing our stories opens the door, opens somebody else's jail, right?
Yeah.
Because now they don't feel so alone. And for, shit that goes on in our heads, that's truly what we do, right? Our mission on that podcast is to normalize how we talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I have to laugh with Lisa, and it's not a dig, but she is the most organized person I've ever met in my entire life. Like, I didn't roll out of bed until like 9 o'clock this morning. And when I read my emails, there were like 5 emails from her.
There were 3. Let's not exaggerate. There were 3.
3, 5, whatever. More emails than I had sent out since I've been out. But it's still organic, right? We're just have all these amazing ideas in our head and all these great episodes that are going to come up. Mm-hmm. And I'm really thankful. And, my co-host on Shit That Goes On Our Heads, Dirty Skittles, she was so excited for us to do this.
I love her so much.
Because our Shit That Goes On Our Heads isn't a suicide-focused podcast. It's a mental health-focused podcast. And being able to share this part of my journey on a podcast that's specific to suicide and mental health and like making it from day 1 to day 2 to day 10 mm-hmm. is something that I've wanted to do for a really long time. And I love the fact that the universe brought us together.
You know who else brought us together? And
PodMatch.
This is a big, big shout out to our friends at PodMatch. And for anyone who does not know what that platform is, it is an absolutely spectacular platform designed for podcast hosts and for guests. And it's kind of like the Tinder of podcasts when you right? like you set up your profile and then depending on, what your subject matter is for your podcast, if you're looking for guests, you can find people who have criteria that matches your podcast. And so that's how Gretchen found me. And it sounds so weird to call you Gretchen. I never call you Gretchen. I'm calling you G. That's what I call you. So I'm not, Fine. Why would I not do that here? So G found me and that's how we came together, but we never, ever would have found each other. I'm sure we never would have known each other existed if it were not for PodMatch. So thank you to all of our beautiful friends over there for putting our worlds together.
And I love that our universes have meshed, right? Because you being an author, me trying to finish my book, which was almost done, right? Until I decided to quit my job and open my own company. So I'm rewriting the whole last chapter of my book.
That's all right.
But it gets to include this. It gets to include my new chapter 1. But I'm so thankful to be alive. Like people get tired of me saying that, but I'm so thankful to be here. I think that glimmer of hope. I think that the 988, and I thank my wife. Right. My biggest problem was I didn't understand what was going on with me, and so my hope is that with this podcast, that we can help people find their voice and their footing a lot sooner than I was able to find mine.
But you know what? You found it, right? You found it. And that's the point. That's what matters. And that's also a statement of how the process is so different for everybody. Like some people figure it out sooner than later, but it doesn't matter when you figure it out, as long as you figure it out and as long as you recognize that you're not like living through all this in a vacuum. And I think one of the things that's going to be most valuable about this podcast is that community side of it, because so many people, like, we're alone in our own head with our own thought loops that are endless. And I think there's some crazy statistic out there that, 95% of the thoughts that we have in our little manufactured thought loops in our head, those thoughts are recycled day after day after day after day. So we're kind of living with the same narratives in our head, telling ourselves the same maybe negative self-talk or depressed narratives, and we can't get out of it. But this podcast, like, we are going to help you find your way out of it. We're going to help remind you. If we have to smack you in the head every week, we're going to remind you you're not alone. We are out there. Even if you have no one that you can like turn to, put your arms around, call during the day, there are places you can go. There are people who will listen. There are support systems that can guide you. So I wish every episode was like 3 days long, because I feel like you and I could talk for 3 days right now.
We could. And, just always remember that you are enough. And as to Lisa's point, you're not alone.
Mm.
And as our episodes go on, you'll get to hear our own stories, right? Of the shit that we both went through, and how I turn that around for me, how I turn my pain into purpose.
Yeah.
And
we both did.
We both did. And I'm so excited for this podcast. Like I said, I'm thankful that the world that our universes collided.
Yeah.
And that we are going to create this amazing podcast full of an amazing community, right? And just keep talking about it. Like, don't shy away from that subject. Don't shy away from saying the word suicide, because it happens.
Mm-hmm. But it'll happen a hell of a lot less when people are actually talking about it freely and openly, because then the people who are too afraid to say how they really feel or too afraid to ask for help will realize that it is okay to talk about these things. It is okay to not be okay. Like, I know that is like the most overused cliche in the world right now, but like, it's the best mantra. It's literally the mantra we should all be living by. And just because you and I have kind of worked our way through, like, navigated to what we would, I guess, call the other side of what we dealt with initially when it was so bad, like, we're still surviving. Like, we're still working. This does not mean that G and I don't have shitty days. And, it happens. But if you take nothing away from this kind of a podcast, take this. It's not always easy. It doesn't always happen right away, but hope is out there. And all you have to do is keep moving forward and keep reaching out until you get to that other side. Because the fact of the matter is, like, you got to walk through the shit to get to the other side. Like, that's the whole point.
1 billion %.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no easy button.
Yeah.
And like, there's no easy button in life, right? Like, even if I had $1 billion, I would still have to deal with my inner demons to, make it to here. And I'm just so grateful for Lisa, aka Sugar. Like, I don't know what the F I'm gonna call her. I'll figure it out as we go.
I think you just figured it out. You think
I just figured it out?
I do.
But I'm so excited for you guys to, jump in next week when we, get into our own stories. And super thankful for the Calmerry for sponsoring our episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're both doing some beautiful things with Calmerry and are excited beyond belief that they're supporting us here in this mission to change this conversation. We have a long and beautiful way to go, and this is only day one, step one. We haven't even gotten started yet.
So hold on to your hats.
Here we go.
Here we go. See you guys next week. Thanks for joining us on The Survivors. Remember, no matter how tough things feel, you are enough, and the world needs you just the way you are. You're not alone in this journey. There's a community here, and every step forward counts. We're so grateful you took the time to listen, and we hope you'll take one day at a time. Just know there's always more light ahead.
Thanks for being here, friends. Just remember, help is out there in so many different places. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please call 988 and a trained crisis counselor like me will be there to help. You can also find an inclusive and comprehensive directory of mental health resources, tools, and content at thehelphub.co. Just remember that help is always just a call or a click away. We'll catch you next week. In the meantime, keep surviving.